So, like the abstract reasoning test or the abstract reasoning assessments become what's stopping you and your offer. So, I'm going to share 3 tips in terms of how to pass the application stage of abstract reasoning assessment today. Hi everyone, Jade from Career Journey Professional, helping you to find and land in the ideal job that's suitable for you. Some of you may think today is a math lesson. It's not. I just really want to share my recent some tips on how to do the abstract reasoning assessment, or called abstract reasoning test. So when are they normally used? They are used in assessment center, assessment day, or the first stage of an online application for most of the big companies. It could be the Big Four bank, the Big Four accounting companies, Fortune 500. I actually came across it recently again for a project that I was cooperating with a global talent management company. So it's a good experience to refresh the memory, and then recalling what my client had difficulties with, and sharing some of the tips. And again, I'm going to use some examples to illustrate what I was going to talk about. So let's get started. First, what I'm showing you is an instruction basically on what this set of questions are like. Of course, they can be different, but however, the instructions are quite straightforward. So from the left to the right, for the first line, you can see it's a small circle turned into a bigger circle, meaning the middle point is basically a magic button that helps the small circle turn into a big circle. Second line, again, small but turned into big, so that could be the same dot. And then what's this dot? It's changing color. So because there's one more additional change, which is changing color. So you can derive the pattern, and then when they give you new shapes from the left, you can guess what should be on the right as choosing your right answer. Let's get started with some of the easy examples, and then we'll jump on to a slightly more medium difficult level. It can be really complicated, and I know you're not a mathematician, neither am I, but that's why we're here, looking at it and what can we do to really tackle this with our limited time given. So we'll start with the easy one. So this easy one, as you can see, the question itself is asking about the middle point. So these two is probably just for you to rule out what's that, or you can even ignore this line because it's just irrelevant to this. So let's look at it. First line, what happened? It's a circle turned into a square. So that's one change, and it's also change of color. White change into black. So that's the 2 dots, and we just need to figure out what is that. So what's in common between these two, so then we know what's that. So third line, what happened is a color change, and it's only one color. So only one change. That means this is changing the color. That means this is changing the shape. So the answer obviously is to change the shape, but not the color, which is 8, right? Quite straightforward. That's how you look at it. As you can see from the upper left-hand side, it's timed 1 minute and 30 seconds. So be prepared and do practice so that you can do these things under a timed pressure. Let's move on to a slightly difficult one, next level one. So, and I can start sharing the tips, the 3 easy, simple tips that I have. Now you're looking at 2 of the, so there are 2 on the left and right. So each line is going to have 4. So in total, there's 12. Comes back to my point number 1, my tip number 1, having a pen and paper ready. It sounds so basic, right? But because nowadays everything is online, you may just fall into the default thinking, I should think this out. I was doing that at the beginning. And I can tell you, when you write it out, it becomes incredibly easy to spot out which one is which, and also you don't have to panic that much. So pen and paper ready, let's get started on this. So the question is, point number 1 and point number 3. So we're trying to figure out what's the pattern for point number 1 and what's the pattern for point number 3. So now looking at this, what happened is, is there any common ones? Yes, point number 2 and point number 4 is the common one. So we're finding what's only for line number 1. What's one change that only for line number 1? And what's one change for only line number 2? Very easy. Let's start writing it down. Line number 1, left to right, there's a color change and there is a line change. Line as in this is vertical, they turn into horizontal, horizontal turn into vertical. Line number 2, it's a shape change. So from circle to square, square to circle, shape, and it's the size change. So it's changing from small to big, big to small. So size change. Line number 3 is a shape change. Also changing the line again, vertical to horizontal, horizontal to vertical. So what's common? What's common in between 1 and 3? 1 and 3 in common, it's the line. So that means you don't need to change the line. And what's coming, this is support, dot number 2 is changing the line. And what's common between 2 and 3 is changing the shape. So you don't need to change the shape. Well, this is one of the way to look at it. And then you can rule it out in that way. However, so that leaves us, what's this number dot 1? Dot 1 is changing color because that's the only one left from line number 1. And dot 3 is changing size. So now we look at the answer. What changed color? So these only D and E is changing color. And changing size, obviously, is D. So that gives you the answer. That's my tip number 1. Pen and paper made it so easy for you to rule out. And my tip number 2 is start with only looking at part of the paragraph or part of the graph to see what's happening. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. If you try to combine square and circle, or it can be confusing, just start looking at the line. What happened to the line in the next part? So don't look at that part yet. The line turned vertical. What happened to the line? The line turned horizontal. That's how you can start ruling out that. Now there are other shapes of graphs and abstract test. Usually it's a square that has either triangle or round or square or other rectangle, whatever shape, and it's a combination of all of them in one graph, and then it gives you several options. Just look at maybe the upper left or the upper right. Just look at one pattern, one part within the graph. How does it change? So some of the rules that I summarize is it usually either rotates or it's changed clockwise or anti-clockwise, or in this case it's horizontal to vertical, or sometimes it disappears, or sometimes it change color. It will be easier for you to start seeing the pattern in that way. It's all about spotting what is the pattern, and starting with just part of it, it's easier in that way. And that's my tip number 2. Tip number 3, it's ruling out the wrong answer. If you don't know what's the right answer, ruling out the wrong answer. So I'll use this example again. When we look at the question, it's dot number 1 and 3. So that basically means line number 3 is not relevant to this question. So if it's too confusing, you don't even need to look at this. Just look at line number 1 and line number 2. What are the changes for you to rule out? So like I suggested, the common between 1 and 3 is actually changing of the line. That means this is how you use the rule out. What's not applicable? That means don't change the line, right? Because this the question itself doesn't have changing line. So anyone that changed line doesn't apply. B and C obviously doesn't apply. And again, change of the shape, which is this dot, doesn't apply. So anyone that changed the shape, so A, C, and E, doesn't apply. So that only give you 2 answers or 2 or 3 answers, and then you can guess. At least you have a higher chance of guesstimating 5 out of them. And most of the time, just using what's overlapping from ruling out, you'll be able to get the final answer. Okay, that's pretty much it. Simple 3 tips. The last one actually is really about practicing and practicing it and knowing what needs to be tested, what to pay attention to. One thing that I always encourage my participants, my clients, it's don't think you can't do this. No one was born knowing how to do this. It's all about practicing. And another thing is, don't think you're bad at this. It's just what you choose to pay attention to is different to what they are trying to test. So it's really about adjusting, which again is about practicing. All right, if you find it helpful, leave a like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.